Welcome to Binding Redux and Flow. After watching this video, you will be able to explain the concept of state change, describe data flow in Redux, and list the advantages of one-way data flow in Redux. In a React application, state stores the properties of a component. When the state of a component changes, React responds by triggering the re-rendering of the document object model, or DOM. As the application expands, it becomes difficult to manage the state in your application. The change in the state may involve the transfer of data between components and a long chain of props that can result in a complicated application code. The solution to this problem is offered by Redux. It is an open-source JavaScript library that can manage the state of your application. It is commonly used with ReactJS, but is not limited to it and can also be used with other JavaScript libraries such as Angular. A conventional React Redux application comprises a single store along with a single root reducer. As the application grows more complex, the root reducer splits into smaller reducers that operate on the different parts of the state tree. An alternate solution can be setting a global variable that can be accessed by different components. However, React will not react to any changes made in the global variable. Redux provides a central store that reduces the complexity of the code and makes the state updating process easier. The Redux elements that are involved in updating of the component properties include Central Store. The store holds the entire application list in the form of the state tree. Actions. These are the information packages sent by the component with a type or description to the reducer. Actions are simple objects which conventionally have two properties, type and payload. The type property is usually a string that identifies the action, and the payload is an optional property that contains some data that is required to perform a task. So the main function of action is to send data from the application to the Redux store. Reducer. This is a simple function that receives the old state and action as input and returns an updated state. Since the state is immutable, a reducer always returns a new state, which is an updated version of the previous state. Subscription. This is triggered in the components whenever the state is updated in the store. The data flow in a React Redux application is unidirectional. It only goes in one direction. The flow of data in a React Redux application begins at the component level when the user interacts with the application UI. This interaction leads to the action creators dispatching an action. So when an action is dispatched, it is received by the root reducer of the application and is passed on to all the reducers. Thus, it becomes the reducer's task to determine if it needs to update the state based on the dispatched action. This is checked by using a simple switch statement to filter out the required actions. Each smaller reducer in the application accepts the dispatched action, and if the type of the dispatched action matches, it returns a newly updated state. It is essential to note here that the state never actually changes in Redux. Instead, the reducer always generates a new state, which is a copy of the old state, but with some modifications. The store then informs the component about the new state, which in turn retrieves the updated state and re-renders the component. Earlier developers used two-way binding to change the state data such that the UI reflected the change. Robust frameworks like Angular and Ember used this type of binding. However, two-way binding was affecting the browser performance adversely with the expansion of applications. In addition, it became difficult to keep track of the data flow. Large companies had a tough time implementing trivial applications like their chat feature. In the one-way data flow paradigm, building presentational components and wrapping them in containers or store, as in Redux applications, solves the problem. Now, the advantage of one-way data flow in Redux is that building large front-end heavy web applications becomes much more manageable. It is easier to manage the state when actions performed on the UI are separated from the changing and updating of the state that happens due to the action. You can use some of the same containers, actions, and reducers in React Native to quickly create apps for iOS and Android. The presentational components do change a bit when you use iOS or Android View components instead of HTML. In this video, you learned that when the state of the component changes, React responds by triggering the re-rendering of the DOM. The Redux elements that are involved in updating of the component properties are Central Store, Actions, Reducer, and Subscription. The data flow in a React Redux application is unidirectional, and it's easier to manage the state when actions performed on the UI are separated from the changing of the state.